A kind-hearted man, Yunwo, truly loves his girlfriend, but is never appreciated and is treated like trash. Yunwo is a young man from a village who ends up marrying a wealthy woman. At first, Yunwo felt pity for this woman. She's a new employee at his workplace named Hee-in. Every day, Hee-in struggles with her tasks and gets scolded constantly by her boss. One day, Yunwo can't bear seeing her like this anymore, so he approaches her. He says, "That's enough. It's better if you don't work here anymore. I can't stand seeing you get scolded every day. Marry me, even though I'm not rich. I promise to take care of you so you won't have to suffer here anymore." Hee-in stands there silent, confused, wondering if he's proposing to her. She gives no answer. A few days later, news spreads that Hee-in is actually the daughter of the company owner. She had only been pretending to be a regular employee. This revelation shocks Yunwo. Feeling insecure, he shuts himself in his room and disappears from Hee-in's life. Yunwo decides to return to his village to help his father with the cattle farm. Unexpectedly, Hee-in follows him to his village in a helicopter. She tells him, "I've thought about it, and I want to marry you." But now Yunwo no longer pities Hee-in, the daughter of a wealthy family. Instead, he feels sorry for himself. Yet Hee-in insists on marrying him. After some initial drama, they agree to marry, and both seem happy. Unfortunately, kind-hearted Yunwo doesn't realize that Hee-in only wants to use his sincerity for her own benefit. Right after their wedding, things seem fine, but after a few days, Hee-in begins to show her true colors. She refuses to let Yunwo touch her and even sets up separate beds. At first, Yunwo thinks this is just normal marriage adjustment, but over time, he's hurt because at work, Hee-in doesn't acknowledge him. One day, there was a family gathering where everyone was free to speak and share their opinions. However, Yunwo was the only one who stayed silent, as no one responded when he tried to speak. His opinions were ignored, as if he didn't matter. Feeling unappreciated by Hee-in and her family deeply hurt him. He wondered sadly why he was treated like trash when, throughout their marriage, he had contributed a lot, especially in protecting the company legally. He thought, "I've done my best, so why do they all look down on me?" Finally, Yunwo asked Hee-in to take a little time to meet him. He waited all day at a restaurant, but Hee-in never showed up, even late into the night. He was utterly disappointed, realizing how pitiful his situation had become. Yunwo then decided to make a plan to divorce Hee-in. After that, he met with a friend and poured out his heart, crying in despair. Both he and his friend had careers in law as attorneys. Yunwo's life became even harder as problems within Hee-in's family kept arising. From company issues to family conflicts like the one with Hee-in's aunt, Yunwo handled it all alone. He even had to help with the preparation for Hee-in's grandmother's memorial service, working like any other servant. Yunwo decided it was time to propose the divorce. He approached his father-in-law, but things didn't go as expected. His father-in-law threatened him, telling Yunwo not to mess with him, warning that anyone who dared oppose him would be destroyed. Yunwo felt his mental state deteriorating. He could no longer sleep peacefully. He eventually sought help from a psychiatrist, discussing his issues with his wife, her family, and his work. The doctor advised him, "You're in serious trouble. The best advice I can give you is to divorce and start a new life." While Yunwo was reflecting on things at work, a mysterious woman known as a matchmaker came to him. She revealed a secret about the prenuptial agreement Hee-in had written. It turned out that Hee-in had included a clause stating that none of her assets would be shared with Yunwo, even in the event of a divorce. There would be no shared property. Hearing this, Yunwo felt even more certain that he didn't matter to Hee-in. Determined, he resolved to end his marriage, which had done nothing but hurt him deeply. One day, Hee-in asked Yunwo to accompany her somewhere. For the first time, Yunwo managed to refuse her. He said, "It's better if you go by yourself. I have a lot of work today." As Hee-in began to get angry, Yunwo just walked away. He drove to his hometown, where he met with his family to share his grievances about being Hee-in's husband and informed them of his plan to divorce her. However, instead of support, Yunwo received a lecture. His father even scolded him, saying that arguments are normal in marriage. "Mind your behavior and don't be reckless," his father warned. Seeing his family side with Hee-in left Yunwo feeling very disappointed. Realizing he didn't have his family's support, Yunwo didn't stay long and went home. That night, he brought divorce papers to give to Hee-in. But before he could show her the papers, Hee-in told him that she didn't have much time left. She had been diagnosed with a severe form of cancer. Hearing this, Yunwo's heart softened immediately. He hugged Hee-in and gave her encouragement, forgetting how much he had suffered because of her actions. In the days that followed, Yunwo once again showed his love. He cared for Hee-in wholeheartedly. Whenever he saw her weak or lying down, his mind would start racing, and he constantly checked on her, fearing something might happen. However, it made him embarrassed when he realized she was actually fine. When they went to work together, Hee-in asked Yunwo to keep her condition a secret, especially from her family. Yunwo agreed, promising her he would. Aside from his constant worry about Hee-in, Yunwo also began planning surprises to make her happy. He was always alert, watching over her. Once, during a meeting, Yunwo saw Hee-in cough and immediately shouted, "Call an ambulance!" This startled everyone, including Hee-in's secretary, who was already aware of the relationship between Yunwo and Hee-in. The woman was very surprised and wondered at how affectionately Yunwo was caring for Hee-in. After work, Yunwo became especially romantic, placing his jacket on Hee-in's shoulders and opening the car door for her like she was a queen. When they arrived home, Hee-in's family invited them for dinner together. During dinner, Hee-in's mother started to provoke her, but suddenly, Yunwo bravely defended Hee-in, who had been silently enduring it. He took Hee-in away from the table. Everyone was shocked to see Yunwo's changed attitude towards them. Yunwo then began researching everything about his wife's illness. He read extensively, exhausting himself until he fell asleep. Hee-in, who happened to see Yunwo's efforts, was truly moved. She realized that someone actually cared about her deeply. She walked over to Yunwo and said, "You don't need to worry about me. Throughout my life, I've experienced many miracles. I'm sure one will come again this time." However, upon hearing this, Yunwo suddenly remembered that if Hee-in recovered, his own suffering might never end. He felt torn, wondering whether he should stay by her side or finally leave her. In her attempt to join the ranks of the country's billionaire conglomerate women, Hee-in tried to get close to a foreign investor who was set to become one of Korea's biggest investors. However, her plan led her to encounter Eun-sung, a man from her past. Meanwhile, Hee-in's younger brother, who was not on good terms with her, was always trying to win over that same investor. With his wife's help, Hee-in's brother aimed to surpass her in wealth. On the designated day, Hee-in attended an event where the investor was also present. Unfortunately, she ran into an old friend who had always bullied her. This woman bragged about having a husband who was always by her side. Angered, Hee-in called Yunwo and asked him to come, but Yunwo said he was busy. Disappointed, Hee-in was unable to stand up to her friend's taunts. But soon, Yunwo suddenly appeared by her side. The investor was amazed and praised Yunwo's good looks. Hee-in felt incredibly satisfied, seeing her friend frozen like a statue. Moreover, her friend's husband's appearance was nowhere near as striking as Yunwo's. Eun-sung, who was also present, was acting as the investor's trusted associate. He greeted Yunwo and introduced himself as an old close friend of Hee-in. At first, Yunwo seemed fine and even laughed with Eun-sung, but after noticing the way Hee-in seemed to have lingering feelings for Eun-sung, he began to feel jealous. News about Eun-sung reached Hee-in's family, who then organized a hunting event and invited Eun-sung as well. The event was originally intended for Hee-in's family only, making Eun-sung the sole outsider. Ironically, Eun-sung was praised while Yunwo was sidelined for appearing clumsy at hunting. Eventually, Yunwo separated himself from the group. As he walked away, he noticed Eun-sung seeming to follow Hee-in, leading to a misunderstanding that heightened the tension. Meanwhile, Hee-in, who had wandered quite far, suddenly found herself surrounded by thick smoke. Unbeknownst to her, a wild boar had been stalking her. Just as the boar was about to attack, a gunshot rang out. Hee-in was shocked to find that the shot came from her husband's rifle. She never expected that Yunwo was not only skilled in shooting, but also had great courage. And it didn't end there. Yunwo even carried her. When Hee-in's family members saw this, they were confused as to why Yunwo and Hee-in were suddenly acting so romantically. After the hunting event ended, Yunwo continued investigating why there was a wild boar in that area, especially since it was supposedly fenced off. He discovered that a part of the fence had been damaged. Meanwhile, Hee-in's family was still curious about Yunwo's shooting skill, especially since he had seemed clumsy during the hunt. Hee-in, who was starting to develop feelings for Yunwo, proudly praised her husband, much to her family's annoyance. Shortly afterward, Yunwo arrived to inform them about the damaged fence. He suggested they check the CCTV footage, but one of the family members hesitated, claiming the CCTV was broken. At home, Hee-in's younger brother, Suchol, was enjoying life with his elegant wife. Suchol was unaware that when he wasn't around, his wife's demeanor changed drastically, as if she had been merely acting in front of him the whole time. Yunwo then approached Hee-in's younger brother, Suchol, with the excuse, "Let's have a fun night together." However, Suchol, being clever, guessed Yunwo's real motive. He teased Yunwo, knowing that he was just using it as a cover. The real reason was that Yunwo felt awkward about sleeping with Hee-in. Realizing he had been found out, Yunwo denied it and bravely went into Hee-in's room. Step by step, he walked carefully so as not to wake Hee-in. But as he was about to lie down, he found that Hee-in was still awake. In the midst of this awkward situation, Yunwo quickly made an excuse, saying he just wanted to use the shower. When Yunwo took off his clothes, Hee-in became flustered seeing his physique. She hadn't realized how attractive Yunwo's body was. She thought to herself, "How did I not notice that my husband's body is so captivating?" She began to pat her head to stop herself from thinking strange thoughts. Meanwhile, Yunwo didn't want to keep showing off his abs for too long. They ended up sleeping together, but because of their mutual awkwardness, they lay with their backs to each other. Hee-in broke the silence. "When was the last time we slept in the same bed?" "If I remember correctly, it was a long time ago, back when I visited your parents' place." Yunwo remained silent. Suddenly, Hee-in added, "At that time, we hugged. Do you want to hug now?" Hearing this, Yunwo was taken aback. The next day, Eun-sung was seen observing Hee-in's family business. It turned out he had hidden ambitions to take over the company. His true nature unintentionally became visible to Yunwo when he was caught disrespecting two elderly caretakers of the villa. Meanwhile, Hee-in received a letter from an overseas hospital. She felt disappointed as she read the contents, which explained that there was still no solution for her illness. She gazed at all her valuable belongings, but upon seeing Yunwo sleeping, she suddenly felt reluctant to leave him, even by death. Because of this worry, Hee-in now found herself stealing glances at Yunwo, both at home and at the office. She felt conflicted about why, at the end of her life, love was beginning to blossom. Even her personal secretary noticed, commenting on how strangely Hee-in had been behaving recently, especially towards Yunwo. After hearing this, Hee-in went to see a psychiatrist to consult about her growing feelings. Meanwhile, Eun-sung, driven by ambition, secretly made a deal with one of Hee-in's family's trusted employees. They were plotting something together. Eun-sung's plan was to get closer to Hee-in. Surprisingly, his plan went smoothly when Yunwo's two older siblings came from the countryside to discuss Yunwo's divorce with Hee-in. Yunwo was shocked to hear about his siblings' arrival, especially since the divorce plans had changed because of Hee-in's illness. He feared that Hee-in might overhear his siblings' conversation. While he was deeply concerned about Hee-in, Yunwo's heart was shattered when he saw Eun-sung bringing her home. Seeing Hee-in intoxicated, Yunwo immediately took her from Eun-sung. They walked together into the house grounds, and Yunwo reminded Hee-in to always be cautious. At that moment, Hee-in suddenly kissed Yunwo. After they got home, Yunwo noticed that Hee-in wasn't fully conscious yet. So he took the opportunity to unlock her phone and delete all messages from his siblings about the divorce. He was relieved to see that she hadn't read them. Just as he finished, Hee-in appeared, slightly more alert, and asked, "What are you doing?" Yunwo, slightly panicked, didn't answer and quickly excused himself. The next day, Yunwo's two siblings informed their parents that the divorce might be off since Hee-in hadn't responded to any messages. Meanwhile, Yunwo tried to act romantic to distract Hee-in from recalling last night's events, especially the part where he took her phone. Unexpectedly, Hee-in reciprocated with romance, brushing a stray hair off Yunwo's shirt. Feeling flustered, Yunwo hurriedly left. It didn't stop there. When they were about to go to work, Yunwo was taken aback because Hee-in had dressed up beautifully, unlike her usual style. She complimented him, saying, "You look handsome, Yunwo." Hearing this, Yunwo felt a bit foolish and flustered. Throughout the day, he kept stealing glances at her, thinking to himself, "Why is this woman so charming?" Yunwo noticed Hee-in nearly tripped because of her shoes. Quickly, he found a new pair of shoes and offered them to her with a smile. At first, Hee-in was confused about receiving new shoes out of the blue, but she didn't think much of it and changed into them. Yunwo was delighted to see her wearing the shoes he gave her. But his happiness was short-lived as Eun-sung suddenly appeared and acted affectionately toward Hee-in. What saddened Yunwo was Hee-in's response. She seemed interested in Eun-sung. Yunwo ended up venting to his friend again, saying, "It feels like my heart is being torn seeing my wife close to another man." His friend replied, "That's a sign you still love Hee-in." Hearing this, Yunwo quickly denied it, saying, "You're wrong. It's because I feel disrespected as her husband." He firmly stated that his intention to divorce Hee-in had never wavered. In truth, it was just his pride speaking. Yunwo didn't want to be seen as indecisive. Meanwhile, Hee-in spent the evening with Eun-sung as they prepared to meet an investor. Eun-sung felt bothered when he noticed the shoes Hee-in was wearing were from Yunwo. A while later, they arrived at the investor's house. After a business discussion, the investor unexpectedly changed his mind and withdrew his investment. However, Hee-in left him with no choice, threatening to expose his secret, that he had multiple mistresses. Hee-in's move was successful. She was very grateful to Eun-sung for informing her about the investor's affairs. Meanwhile, Yunwo, having finished venting, was on his way home. Along the way, he thought of Hee-in and decided to buy some food. His friend teased him, saying, "See, I was right. You're definitely falling in love with your wife." Feeling caught, Yunwo angrily replied, "I told you. No, this food is for me." When he arrived home, Yunwo was greeted with a surprise from Hee-in. She handed him a letter from the hospital. The letter stated there was now great hope for her recovery. Seeing this, Yunwo immediately imagined his life going back to how it used to be, feeling unappreciated and trampled on like trash. And as he watched Hee-in begin to laugh again, he felt even more burdened. The next day, Yunwo became extremely annoyed when he saw Eun-sung come to his house. He and Hee-in appeared very close as they chatted and ate together. Yunwo's heart burned as he thought, "That man keeps smiling at my wife. It's the first time I've ever felt irritated seeing someone smile." Unable to stay calm, Yunwo kept spying on Eun-sung and Hee-in. Not long after, Hee-in's younger sibling joined them and then took Eun-sung outside. He tried to take advantage by offering Eun-sung a partnership, provided that Eun-sung would persuade the investor to also invest in his own company. Unfortunately, Eun-sung, who wasn't interested, said he would think about it. This matter reached Hee-in's mother, who favored Hee-in's sibling over her and would be furious if Hee-in outshone them. After Eun-sung left, Hee-in's mother immediately confronted her angrily. Suddenly, Hee-in felt dizzy. Her illness had flared up again. She nearly fainted, but luckily Yunwo arrived just in time. He defended Hee-in, leaving her mother puzzled by the drastic change in their relationship. In their room, Yunwo urged Hee-in to reveal her illness to her family. Yet once again, Hee-in refused, not wanting her family to pity her or be burdened. Meanwhile, Eun-sung, sensing things were going his way, conspired with people close to Hee-in's family. He planned to persuade the directors of Hee-in's family company to collaborate with him by making the company a sacrificial investment for their benefit. When Hee-in was inspecting her mall, she noticed a customer angrily berating an employee. At first, she stayed silent, but after observing the situation closely, Hee-in stepped in to defend her employee. She went so far as to call security and even threatened to report the issue to the police. Afterward, Hee-in planned to visit Yunwo's family, where a village head election was taking place, and Yunwo's father was one of the candidates. Yunwo's father was not very popular with the community, but when Hee-in arrived and distributed care packages, everyone flocked to her. Hee-in was happy to be able to help her father-in-law. She then spent some time walking around the village. However, her illness suddenly flared up. Meanwhile, Yunwo, who had just arrived in the village, didn't see Hee-in at home. He quickly went out to look for her, running until nighttime. When he finally found her, Yunwo got angry. "Where have you been? Do you have any idea how worried I was looking for you?" he said. Hee-in replied, "I'm not a patient. You don't have to act like that." Yunwo was disappointed with her response and walked away. When Hee-in saw Yunwo's back covered in sweat, she felt deeply touched. She realized he must have been exhausted from searching for her all day. Finally, she confessed, "Actually, I always forget many things. I can't remember like a normal person anymore because of this illness." Hearing this, Yunwo's disappointment vanished and was replaced by sympathy. He immediately turned around and embraced his crying wife. Yunwo then asked why she had come to his hometown. Hee-in said, "I heard father-in-law was running for village head. I wanted to help him." Her attention to his family made Yunwo happy. He kept gazing at Hee-in, feeling as if the love he had once lost was returning. Meanwhile, Yunwo's whole family, worried about them, began searching. When Hee-in saw this, she realized she was surrounded by good people who genuinely cared, so different from her own family. They eventually returned to Yunwo's house. It was a bit awkward as they had to share a room again. Yunwo took the initiative to dry Hee-in's hair first, and then he noticed she was also hurt. He tended to her wound, but without realizing it, their faces got closer and closer. Suddenly, Hee-in closed her eyes. Yunwo panicked and quickly pulled away, leaving the room. On the other hand, Hee-in felt embarrassed and got angry. Yunwo kept running, wondering what's going on. Meanwhile, Hee-in, hoping Yunwo would come back, sent him a message because she couldn't sleep. However, Yunwo was busy talking with his older brother for advice. He was confused because lately he felt out of his mind whenever he saw Hee-in, even though he had previously been repulsed and planned to divorce her. Hee-in, who was waiting for Yunwo to return, suddenly found herself reminiscing about the early days of their marriage. It was finally revealed that Hee-in's drastic change in behavior wasn't because she didn't love Yunwo, but rather due to deep disappointment. She had once been pregnant, but due to an unfortunate incident, she suffered a miscarriage. Hee-in had prepared everything for the baby's arrival, and that was when she began to feel like her married life was cursed. The next day, Yunwo finally came to see Hee-in again, but this only made her more disappointed. Her mood had already soured. They left Yunwo's parents' home and returned to Hee-in's house. During the journey, Hee-in was silent and very cold toward Yunwo. It happened to be pouring rain, and although Yunwo tried to hold an umbrella for her, she rejected it, preferring to get soaked. Suddenly, Eun-sung appeared and offered Hee-in an umbrella. Seeing this, Yunwo's heart began to ache. At home, Hee-in focused all her attention on Eun-sung and completely ignored Yunwo. Meanwhile, Eun-sung grew more confident, thinking that Hee-in was more interested in him. In addition to dealing with Hee-in, Yunwo also had conflicts with Hee-in's easily manipulated younger brother, who had fallen for Yeon-sung's schemes and was doing things that could threaten Hee-in's family's reputation. Yunwo firmly rejected all his suggestions. That day, Yunwo received information that the CCTV footage of the wild boar attack on Hee-in had been found, but it needed repair. Yunwo took the footage for restoration, although it would take a long time because the files were heavily damaged. He assured the technician that he didn't mind waiting as long as the footage could be fully restored. At the hospital, Hee-in met with her doctor for a consultation about her illness. The doctor informed her that she was deficient in white blood cells, which made it impossible to proceed with her treatment. Hearing this, Hee-in was devastated, as her hope for recovery was shattered. Feeling unsatisfied, Hee-in decided to secretly go abroad to seek treatment at a hospital that offered some hope. Although her doctor initially warned against it, Hee-in, feeling desperate, went in secret without even informing Yunwo. Meanwhile, Yunwo felt very anxious because he couldn't reach Hee-in. However, he tried to stay calm, not wanting to be mistreated again. Eventually, Yunwo met a friend to relieve some stress, but he couldn't stop worrying, knowing that there was still no news from Hee-in. At the same time, Hee-in secretly hoped that Yunwo would be there by her side, yet her pride held her back from asking for help, especially since they hadn't been getting along. Hee-in went to a hospital in Germany where the doctor told her the same thing, that she couldn't undergo treatment due to her lack of white blood cells. Now, Hee-in's hope of recovery had completely vanished. She was so devastated that she couldn't even cry anymore. In her despair, she thought she heard a voice calling her name. When she turned, she saw it was Yunwo, her husband. He had followed her to Germany after a friend informed him of Hee-in's location. On the night Yunwo visited his friend, he watched videos of Hee-in's interviews, and in one of them, she mentioned that no matter what happened, she wanted to stay by her husband's side. Hearing this, Yunwo broke down in tears, feeling as though he finally realized the depth of Hee-in's troubles. This was why he had come to Germany without hesitation. When Hee-in saw Yunwo standing in front of her, she couldn't believe it. She immediately began to cry, and Yunwo joined her, feeling just as heartbroken. They finally understood each other. One thing they both realized was that no matter how angry they became, they couldn't erase the love they still held in their hearts. They hugged each other tightly, letting out all the sadness they had been holding back. Meanwhile, the CCTV footage Yunwo had sent for restoration was successfully recovered. In it, the person responsible for damaging the fence was revealed. It was Hee-in's sister-in-law. She had deliberately damaged the fence and lured the wild boar, intending to harm Hee-in. Moreover, she continued her schemes by conspiring with Eun-sung. They secretly entered Yunwo's room to steal anything potentially valuable. They even found a vault that Eun-sung suspected contained secrets. They also found a card indicating the place where Yunwo had taken the CCTV footage for restoration. Elsewhere, Yunwo and Hee-in went out to find some food. Hee-in kept talking about her death, wrapping her words in a seemingly cheerful tone. She said, "When I die, you must stand at the front line to protect my family. As for my will, I'll make sure to change it so that you get what you deserve." But Yunwo, seeing through her fake cheerfulness, just remained silent with tears welling in his eyes. He softly replied, "I don't need the will. You're free to change it after you recover." Hearing this, Hee-in could no longer maintain her cheerful facade. Her heart ached and tears filled her eyes. They eventually found a hotel to rest. Initially, they kept their distance, but over time, the atmosphere softened. Yunwo kept watching Hee-in as she slept. A little later, he went to a church to pray, hoping his wife would recover and live a normal life again. The next day, Yunwo met with the doctor handling Hee-in's illness. He insisted that the doctor provide treatment for Hee-in. The doctor refused repeatedly, but Yunwo kept pressing, especially after mentioning that the hospital had previously received significant funding from Hee-in's family's company. Yunwo asked the doctor to find another way. Finally, with no other choice, the doctor agreed to Yunwo's request. Yunwo then shared the good news with Hee-in, who was genuinely happy, feeling as if her hope had been restored. Meanwhile, Eun-sung went to the place where Yunwo's CCTV footage was being restored, offering a large sum if the technician would hand over the data. Yunwo and Hee-in grew closer as time went on. They took walks together to clear their minds while waiting for Hee-in's treatment to begin. Although still a bit awkward, they both enjoyed these moments, reminiscent of when they had first gotten married. When it was time for her treatment, Hee-in suddenly disappeared, chasing after a boy who had run past her. For some reason, she felt like she knew the boy and had a close connection to him, though it was only a figment of her imagination. A nurse soon informed Yunwo that Hee-in was missing, and he quickly ran to find her. Fortunately, Hee-in hadn't gone too far, and Yunwo managed to catch up to her. He hugged her with a deep sense of relief, worried that something had happened. He then asked, "What's wrong?" Hee-in replied, "I remembered something from the past." It turned out that Hee-in had suffered a traumatic experience. When she was a child, her older brother had died trying to save her. This incident caused her mother to resent her, viewing Hee-in as the reason for her brother's death. Meanwhile, Eun-sung's wicked schemes continued. He set a trap to make Hee-in's father lose trust in Yunwo, creating the appearance that there was something dangerous in Yunwo's room that posed a threat to Hee-in's family. Eventually, the room was searched and they found a safe. With the help of an expert, they managed to open it, discovering a divorce paper that Yunwo had once prepared. Everyone was shocked by this. Now, Just as Yunwo was deeply in love, he faced yet another trial. News of the divorce paper reached Hee-in. Instantly, her newly rekindled love wilted and vanished. She threw away the flowers Yunwo had given her, despite him running all the way, exhausted, to deliver them. She said she was deeply disappointed and no longer wanted to continue her treatment. Feeling regretful, Yunwo kept trying to persuade Hee-in to continue her treatment. But when this approach failed, he finally pretended to be an annoying man. He spoke hurtful words to Hee-in, hoping that if she came to hate him, she would proceed with the treatment to eventually get back at him. Surprisingly, this tactic worked. Hee-in truly began to despise Yunwo. She returned to Korea and refused to interact with him in any way. In then met with her family and asked them not to retaliate against Yunwo. She stated that this was a personal matter and that she would handle the revenge herself. Meanwhile, Yunwo decided to check on the progress of the restored CCTV footage. Unfortunately, he found that the place had been shut down. Realizing he'd been sabotaged, he checked the car's CCTV that he had left there to monitor the technician. Sure enough, he found footage of Yoon-sung also visiting the place. Yunwo was now certain that Eun-sung was behind all this. Yunwo returned home, where Hee-in's mother was already prepared to scold him. But it didn't end there. Yunwo was summoned to face Hee-in's grandfather and received a harsh reprimand. He was accused of being a traitor. Yunwo tried to explain the truth, but Hee-in's grandfather was blinded by anger and couldn't distinguish right from wrong. Eun-sung was secretly watching the incident with a hidden camera, feeling that his path was getting smoother now that Yunwo had been sidelined. Now, Hee-in felt disgusted every time she saw Yunwo. Even so, Yunwo continued to show his concern, warning her, "Be careful around Eun-sung. He's not as good as you think." Unfortunately, Hee-in used this against him to hurt Yunwo. Seeing that his efforts were unappreciated, Yunwo didn't let it bother him and left. Hee-in, filled with rage, also stormed off to her office dressed in all red. Her personal secretary then warned all the employees to be cautious. "The boss is in a bad mood today. Just look at her outfit color. Make sure not to get on her bad side." In the days that followed, Hee-in and Yunwo's relationship appeared increasingly strained. Hee-in openly told her employees that she was in conflict with her husband. Yunwo, however, didn't respond with a single word. Instead, he focused on investigating Eun-sung, whom he found suspicious, all for Hee-in's safety. Meanwhile, Hee-in's father, still hoping Yunwo was innocent, met with two people he had hired to monitor Yunwo's behavior. According to them, Yunwo had never done anything suspicious or dangerous toward Hee-in's family. Hee-in's father began to wonder why Yunwo would create divorce papers if he had done nothing wrong. He finally informed Hee-in about this, but instead of recognizing the truth, Hee-in insisted that Yunwo must have some secret he was hiding. On the other hand, with the help of his best friend, Yunwo began uncovering information about Eun-sung. It turned out that he was adopted and raised in the United States. Strangely, Eun-sung attended a prestigious school even though his adoptive parents were very poor. Not long afterward, Eun-sung's parents reportedly died from alcohol poisoning, yet there was no record of them ever drinking alcohol. After discussing this, Yunwo returned home and saw Hee-in feeding a cat in the rain. Yunwo got out of his car and approached her, expecting her to give him a scowl, but to his surprise, she greeted him with a cheerful smile, as if she had forgotten everything. Hee-in told him she believed she could recover if she continued treatment in Germany. Hearing this, Yunwo immediately broke into tears, as he recognized this as a symptom of her illness, where she would always forget her memories. Seeing him cry, Hee-in hugged him and said, "I love you so much." This made Yunwo's tears flow even more. He then gently tried to remind her of everything she had forgotten, including their argument in Germany. Slowly, Hee-in began to remember, but this only reignited her anger toward Yunwo. She told him, "I suffer so much being with you. We both suffer. Fine, let's settle the divorce issue." The next day, without delay, Yunwo saw that Hee-in had already hired a lawyer for their divorce. The lawyer she hired was known to be highly skilled and ruthless, willing to do anything to win for his client. Yunwo's friend, Cheng Meng, warned him to be cautious, describing the lawyer as no different from a mafia. However, as a lawyer himself, Yunwo was not intimidated in the least. In fact, he had no intention of fighting. When called in to review the documents Hee-in's lawyer had prepared, he said, "I don't need to read any of this. Just do whatever you want. I'll accept it and won't make any counterclaims." With that, the divorce was finalized. Yet as Hee-in returned home, she suddenly began recalling all the happy moments from the early days of their marriage. And then opened the photos her father had gathered from his investigation of Yoon-woo. She felt bored as Yoon-woo's daily activities seemed repetitive. Strangely, she became curious about his habits and decided to try them out herself. First, she played baseball. Then she went to a restaurant that Yoon-woo often visited. Unexpectedly, Yoon-woo happened to visit the restaurant at the same time. Feeling panicked, Hee-in thought of eavesdropping. However, she was deeply saddened by what she overheard. She listened to Yoon-woo expressing his hope to always be by her side. Deep down, Hee-in also wanted the same thing. She began to cry bitterly. Elsewhere, Yoon-woo's mother arranged a meeting with her in-laws and changed her appearance to avoid being looked down upon. Unfortunately, during the meeting, Hee-in's mother criticized Yoon-woo's mother for dressing too flashy for someone from the countryside. A heated argument ensued, and they exchanged harsh words until Hee-in's mother left. Meanwhile, Hee-in's younger brother, who was focused on increasing his wealth, found himself in trouble. With no other options, he turned to Yoon-woo for help. Yoon-woo agreed to assist him, but once the issue was resolved, an even bigger problem arose. This time, he asked Eun-sung to invest by offering the family company as collateral. Yoon-woo warned Hee-in's grandfather to be cautious, as the company was at risk, but he was dismissed. Not only that, but Yoon-woo found he was locked out of the company's website, effectively indicating he had been fired. Shortly after, security staff surrounded him and demanded he leave immediately. Hee-in witnessed this and became furious, upset that Yoon-woo was being treated so disrespectfully. She advised him to resign rather than be humiliated and dismissed, but Yoon-woo replied that there was something important he needed to do before leaving the company. As he was about to go, Yoon-woo met a detective who shared critical information about Eun-sung. It turned out that Hee-in's grandfather had a much younger lover, and there were suspicions that Eun-sung was actually the son of this woman, hidden for a certain purpose. They decided to conduct a DNA test. On Hee-in's grandfather's birthday, the DNA results were released, confirming that Eun-sung and the woman were indeed mother and son. Without delay, Yoon-woo informed Hee-in's grandfather of the news, leaving him devastated. Coincidentally, he was having a meal with his lover at that moment. Overcome, Hee-in's grandfather collapsed to the floor, weakened, not only from the shocking news from Yoon-woo, but also because he had been poisoned by his lover. Additionally, Hee-in's younger brother's wife felt that her plans had come to fruition. She had conspired with Eun-sung and decided to leave her husband. Chaos erupted within Hee-in's family as no one was allowed to see the grandfather's condition. Moreover, none of Hee-in's family members had any authority over the company anymore, as everything suddenly transferred to Eun-sung's ownership. The news quickly went viral. With cunning deceit, Eun-sung spread propaganda that Hee-in's family were fraudsters who had taken large sums of investors' money. Reporters began hunting them down, but Yoon-woo, anticipating this outcome, had already taken Hee-in's family to his hometown. They had lost everything, and no one was willing to help them. Nevertheless, Yoon-woo's family welcomed them warmly and continued to treat them with respect, even though they were no longer bound as family. Despite this, Hee-in's mother still felt too proud, loudly declaring that she would not rely on Yoon-woo's family for shelter. While speaking, she didn't notice where she was stepping and ended up putting her foot in cow dung, which made her scream for help. Meanwhile, Yoon-woo's parents were unbothered and graciously continued to welcome Hee-in's family, even serving them with the utmost hospitality. Yoon-woo's mother even helped clean the cow dung off Hee-in's mother's foot. When the food was served, everyone fell silent. They noticed there was nothing particularly appetizing on the table. Suddenly, Hee-in picked up some food and began eating enthusiastically. Gradually, each of them started tasting the food, discovering it was actually quite good. For the first time, Hee-in's family ate heartily, even though it was without luxury. They began to embrace a simple life in that house. Meanwhile, Hee-in's younger brother seemed largely indifferent to his family's situation. more concerned about his beloved wife. "How could you betray me so deeply and even leave me?" he lamented. As for Hee-in, she looked completely at ease, listening to music. She felt that her former life was no longer her purpose. She was happy with people who genuinely cared about her. Suddenly, Hee-in noticed the locket she was wearing, the very one she had once thrown away. She remembered a young man who had come to her rescue when she was still in school. Finally, she realized that the young man was Yun-wo. Shocked, she was stunned to realize she had met Yun-wo long before they got to know each other at work. She sent a message to Yun-wo asking about the locket's owner. Out of the blue, Yun-wo panicked, quickly took the locket, and lied, saying, "I don't know who owns it." Hee-in was amused to see Yun-wo's flustered reaction, a clear sign he was lying. All this time, Yun-wo had never been able to forget the girl and had asked his friend to keep looking for her. Little did he know that the woman he had been searching for was right beside him all along. The next morning, Yun-wo entered Hee-in's room and found her still asleep. He quietly opened the window, covered her with a blanket to keep her warm, and made sure she remained peacefully asleep. He even checked if she was sick, worried about why she hadn't woken up yet. Such was Yun-wo's love for Hee-in, despite the many wounds he carried in his heart. Meanwhile, Eun-sung, who has taken control of Hee-in's family company called Queen's Group, begins plotting his next crimes. Currently, Eun-sung is only the acting leader and needs to find the hidden funds that Hee-in's grandfather stashed away. If he manages to locate them, he will then be seen as a potential legitimate owner of the company. Another issue stands in his way: Yun-wo. Yun-wo still works there and cannot be easily dismissed because of his status as a lawyer with strong knowledge of the law. Yun-wo collaborates with his friend to reclaim the company and return it to Hee-in's family. On the other hand, Hee-in's parents are still struggling to adjust to their new lifestyle, constantly recalling their past life of luxury. Yun-wo's parents patiently support them, encouraging them to keep their spirits up. One evening, Hee-in is seen anxiously waiting for Yun-wo to come home. Suddenly, a young child approaches her. It's Yun-wo's nephew. While talking, Hee-in begins to feel the world around her dimming and spinning. Eventually, she collapses and faints. Her family is very concerned, except for her mother, who dismisses it, saying there's no need to overreact. It's probably just a migraine. When Yun-wo hears that Hee-in has fainted, he rushes over and, seeing her regain consciousness, finally feels relieved. He says, "I've scheduled an appointment with the doctor. We can go see him tomorrow." Hee-in notices that Yun-wo's caring nature hasn't changed, but she tells him, "You don't need to worry about that. I know you're busy. Just focus on your work." Suddenly, Yun-wo brings up the matter of the company. He says there's hope for taking over the company, and the key lies with a land broker who suddenly disappeared. This broker knows all of Eun-sung and his gang's wrongdoings. The next day, Yun-wo takes Hee-in to the hospital to see the doctor, but he hears that Eun-sung is there as well, trying to gather information on Hee-in's condition. Fearing that Eun-sung might spot them, Yun-wo quickly takes Hee-in away from the hospital. Later that night, Yun-wo realizes his car is being followed. He tries to escape, but the car behind him is very skillful and continues to tail him. Meanwhile, Hee-in, worried that Yun-wo hasn't come home despite the late hour, suddenly sees a car and a man standing in front of it. Thinking it might be Yun-wo, she approaches only to discover that it's Eun-sung. Meanwhile, Yun-wo is being followed by another man, who turns out to be the missing land broker. Unable to leave Korea because Yun-wo reported him, which blocked his exit, the man is furious with Yun-wo and has been tailing his car. He orders his men to attack Yun-wo. However, there's something Yun-wo has kept hidden. Behind his unassuming demeanor, he is actually a karate champion, and he manages to defeat all his attackers. On the other hand, Hee-in, feeling a bit frightened, asks Eun-sung why he's there. He replies that he wants to act as a responsible guardian for Hee-in's illness. Hearing that, Hee-in replied, "You don't need to bother." When she refused Eun-sung's offer, her younger brother suddenly appeared and angrily drove Eun-sung away. Eun-sung told Hee-in, "I will wait for your answer." After that, Hee-in scolded her brother for defending her earlier. Not long after, Yun-wo finally came home. Hee-in immediately checked to see if Yunwo was okay, noticing several wounds on his body. Yunwo said, "It's nothing, I'm fine." However, Hee-in insisted that Yunwo be honest. Before that, she tended to his wounds. Finally, Yunwo admitted to the attack by the broker and his men. Yunwo said he had won the fight, but Hee-in still worried and asked him to avoid any further fights. She said, "Next time, you must run away, just don't fight." Yunwo hesitated, but extended his pinky finger as a sign of agreement. The next day, while having breakfast together, Hee-in's parents noticed the bruises on Yunwo's body and asked what happened. Yunwo's father reassured them, saying, "Don't worry, my son is a remarkable man, a karate expert who always wins championships." Everyone was amazed to learn this fact. Shortly afterward, Hee-in's younger brother approached Yunwo to inform him that Eun-sung had come to see Hee-in the previous night. But before he could say anything, Hee-in appeared and issued a warning. Seeing her, Yunwo invited her to a small cafe to talk for a bit. To ease the tension, he bought her ice cream. Soon, Hee-in opened up the conversation. She asked if Yunwo had ever thought their marriage would end like this. She wondered, "If time could be turned back, would you still choose to marry me?" Hee-in thought that a man like Yunwo, who was so desirable, would have many girls interested in him. Why would he marry her? But Yunwo's answer touched her deeply. He said, "I have never regretted marrying you, even if we ended up like this." After their conversation, Yunwo bid her farewell and headed to the office. At the office, the staff started gossiping about Yunwo, accusing him of corruption, which threatened his position in the company. Even if he managed to keep his job, Yunwo might no longer be a lawyer, but instead reassigned. The mastermind behind all these slanderous rumors was none other than Eun-sung. Despite this, Yunwo remained composed and controlled his emotions. Meanwhile, Hee-in's brother was still distressed after being betrayed by his wife. He was feeling down until he saw Yunwo's nephew playing a game, which made him reminisce about when he and his wife used to enjoy gaming together. The man borrowed the device briefly and logged into his game account. Surprisingly, his wife was online. Unlike her brother, who was constantly downhearted, Hee-in was determined to take action. She asked her secretary to bring several important documents. During their conversation, Hee-in finally learned about the issues Yunwo was currently facing. She couldn't hold herself back and immediately called Eun-sung. However, Hee-in found herself in a dilemma when Eun-sung said he could make Yunwo's situation even worse. He promised not to interfere with Yunwo if his request to become Hee-in's guardian was accepted. On the other hand, Yunwo also eventually found out about Eun-sung's visit to see Hee-in the other day. Feeling jealous, he confronted Hee-in and asked, "What did you two talk about?" Hee-in replied, "I was offered the chance to move back to my old home." Hearing this, Yunwo became deeply saddened but didn't dare to protest, given that they were no longer husband and wife. After that conversation, Yunwo was overwhelmed with sorrow and drank heavily until he was drunk. Unconsciously, he ended up standing outside Hee-in's room, pouring out his sadness. He confessed that he still loved Hee-in very much. All his words were heard by Hee-in, leaving her feeling heartbroken as well. The next day, Yunwo's mother overheard Hee-in on the phone, catching hints about the illness she had been suffering from. Yunwo's mother was shocked and went to Yunwo's room to ask, "Did you not know that your ex-wife is seriously ill?" Finally, Yunwo had no choice but to be honest and explain everything. He then asked his mother to keep it a secret, as it was Hee-in's request. Meanwhile, Hee-in eventually accepted Eun-sung's offer. She agreed to move back to her old home. Hee-in then went to check on the condition of her former mall, where she had an appointment with Eun-sung. She set a condition for him. He must never interfere with Yunwo again. This agreement was discovered by Hee-in's secretary, who immediately went to Yunwo to inform him of everything. Hearing this, Yunwo rushed to stop Hee-in, but it was too late. He arrived to see Hee-in and Eun-sung already facing the media. Yunwo was devastated, but soon everything took a turn. Instead of collaborating with Eun-sung, Hee-in tarnished his name by revealing the threats she had received. She stated that if she refused to cooperate, Yunwo, her ex-husband, would be destroyed. Finally, she said, "I don't want anything anymore. My remaining time is short." Her statement shocked everyone, especially Eun-sung. On the other hand, Yunwo still couldn't believe that he had misjudged Hien. In the end, Yunwo emerged as the true winner. With tears in his eyes, Yunwo watched as Hien began to weaken. Just as he feared, Hien's illness acted up, causing her to collapse. Yunwo quickly caught her and rushed her to the hospital. He cried desperately as he watched Hien lying unconscious. Meanwhile, happy memories flooded Hien's mind. She realized that her life had been filled with happiness when she was with Yunwo, and she had never held any hatred in her heart. Shortly afterward, Yunwo's family arrived. For the first time, they looked at Hien with genuine affection. They were devastated to learn that Hien had been suffering from a severe illness all this time. Their sorrow deepened when the doctor informed them that Hien's time was limited. Regrets became unavoidable, especially for Yunwo's mother, who had always treated her unfairly. Throughout the night, Yunwo stayed by Hien's side, praying that she would regain consciousness soon. The next morning, Yunwo saw Hien starting to open her eyes. He cried with joy. Hien finally expressed her feelings. She said, "From the beginning of our marriage, so much has happened, but I realize that my feelings for you have never changed." Hearing this, Yunwo was deeply moved and kept crying. Hien's family came again, and their hearts were filled with happiness seeing her awake. However, Hien's mother kept her distance, unable to stop her tears. She was truly remorseful. Hien saw this and then said that her illness was not her mother's fault. She didn't want her mother to live in regret. Her words only made her mother more emotional. With all her heart, she apologized and regretted everything she had done. Meanwhile, Eun-sung was now facing issues because of Hien's previous statement. One by one, investors were pulling out. Hien's relationship with Yunwo grew warmer. They were like newlyweds again, filled with love and affection. With everything that had happened, Eun-sung went to see Hien once more. This time, he could no longer hide his feelings. Eun-sung said, "From the moment I first met you, I've been in love with you." Hoping to touch Hien's heart, Eun-sung instead faced harsh treatment as Hien called him shameless and disgusting. In the end, Eun-sung was heartbroken as his love was rejected, for Hien had only Yunwo in her heart. Hearing this drove Eun-sung mad, and he went to find Yunwo, leading to a fight. However, Yunwo was stronger and managed to defeat Eun-sung. After dealing with Eun-sung, Hien and Yunwo began investigating the company funds embezzled by Hien's grandfather. If someone else found it first, the company would be at risk of bankruptcy. Yunwo said, "I know how much you love this company. I don't want you to be even sadder because of this." Meanwhile, Eun-sung was still unwilling to give up and also sought information on the missing funds. To speed up their search, Yunwo asked his friends for help. He showed them a document to examine. Since she had declined Eun-sung's offer, Hien returned to Yunwo's family home. After her shower, Yunwo helped her dry her hair. Suddenly, Hien said, "I feel like my illness is worsening. Sometimes I lose my vision and my body feels weaker." Hearing this saddened Yunwo deeply. Elsewhere, Hien's younger sibling was starting to bond with Yunwo's older sibling. She asked Yunwo's older sibling to help her learn self-defense. She said, "Help me, brother-in-law. I feel so weak. I want to start living a real life." The next day, Hien and Yunwo continued their search. Little by little, they found clues leading to the location of the hidden funds. While on the road, a car started following them. But then, something shocking happened. When the driver stepped out, it turned out to be Yunwo. Hien was very confused and then saw that Yunwo, who was with her, had turned into Eun-sung. Once again, this happened because of Hien's worsening illness, which prevented her from recognizing people. Yunwo then suggested they go home together, but Hien refused. She needed to stay with Eun-sung because, through him, she could meet her grandfather. Yunwo felt something was off. He was sure Hien had her reasons for doing this. Instead of taking Hien to her grandfather, Eun-sung took her to a restaurant for a romantic meal together. Eun-sung began making up stories to gain Hien's sympathy. However, after talking at length, Hien just stayed silent and paid him no attention. Finally, Eun-sung allowed Hien to meet her grandfather, hoping she would sympathize with his sincerity. Letting Hien see her grandfather was like defying his own mother, leading to an argument between them. Eun-sung's mother expressed her discomfort to Hien, and shortly after, Hee-in left the place. On her way back, Hee-in felt she couldn't think clearly. She got lost and was very confused. Fortunately, Yoon-woo appeared just in time. When Hee-in saw Yoon-woo, she felt so relieved and safe near him. They finally rested at a hotel, with Yoon-woo enthusiastically taking care of her. Then a question slipped out of Hee-in's mouth. "If I die later, will you marry again?" "I'm sure there will be a line of women waiting." Her question, somewhat playful yet sad, left Yoon-woo unsure whether to feel sad or touched, sensing how precious he was to her. Hee-in then shared everything that had happened, especially seeing her grandfather already senile. Meanwhile, Hee-in's sister-in-law, who had betrayed her husband, began to feel regret. She actually had a lover and even had a child with him. However, while living together, this man treated her harshly and disrespectfully. She suddenly thought of her husband, who had always been sincere. Finally, she planned to leave her lover. In the morning, Hee-in saw Yoon-woo still asleep. She touched Yoon-woo's face, but this woke him up, and without hesitation, he immediately hugged her. Hee-in, too, stayed silent as he hugged her from behind. They then spent the entire day together, with Yoon-woo being very attentive. He surprised her by saying he wanted to marry her again and start everything over. Unfortunately, Hee-in declined Yoon-woo's proposal because she felt unworthy. She said, "My illness is now very serious. I would only burden you if we started over." Besides, she felt she didn't have much time left. The two of them ended up crying, Yoon-woo in disappointment and Hee-in out of guilt. Elsewhere, it turned out Hee-in's grandfather was only pretending to be senile. He was actually creating his own strategy, as he felt he no longer had the power he once did. Hee-in's grandfather told her that there was a treasure he had hidden in his house. Hee-in shared this information with Yoon-woo and her family. That night, Hee-in's younger sibling, along with her new group of friends, went out for a breath of fresh air. Unexpectedly, his unfaithful wife appeared before him. She said she was very sorry, but Hee-in's mother refused to accept a woman who had betrayed their family. Meanwhile, Hee-in's grandfather, who had been pretending all along, was finally exposed. He was pressured to reveal everything about his assets. However, since he refused, he decided to end it all. This news reached Hee-in and her family, and they were all deeply distressed by the incident. Feeling that this had gone too far, Yoon-woo became very serious. Quickly, he searched for the hidden room where the assets were kept. However, the room was already empty, as someone else had found it first. That person was Hee-in's grandfather's friend, who was also Hoon-sung's mother. Meanwhile, Yoon-woo received news that Hee-in's illness could truly be cured, but there was a consequence. It wasn't about the cost, but Hee-in's memory would be affected. Joy and sadness mixed together. Yoon-woo immediately conveyed this to his father and Hee-in's father. Finally, it was decided that Hee-in still had to undergo the treatment, even with the risk of memory loss. Yoon-woo then shared this news with Hee-in and the rest of her family. They were all very happy, especially Hee-in, who suddenly became full of energy. Before the treatment began, Yoon-woo created many memories with Hee-in for the last time. During that time, Hee-in revealed a secret, saying, "Isn't there a locket in your room? Actually, I am the owner of that locket." Hearing that, Yoon-woo was very surprised at how unique their fate was. He immediately hugged Hee-in and promised to love her forever. Meanwhile, Hee-in's brother also sincerely accepted his wife, who had once been unfaithful, and the woman finally realized her husband's sincerity and fell in love with him. Not long after, the farewell happened. Both Hee-in and Yoon-woo, who were heading abroad, and Hee-in's family, who were returning to their hometown, found it hard to part since they had grown so close. When Yoon-woo and Hee-in arrived in Germany, they quickly began the treatment. However, in the final moments, Yoon-woo felt he could no longer hide the fact that Hee-in would lose her memory after the treatment. Hearing this, Hee-in's cheerful face changed instantly. She was very angry that Yoon-woo hadn't been honest from the start. They argued, and Hee-in said she would rather remain as she was than lose her identity. Shortly afterward, the car Hee-in was in was hit by a truck. Yoon-woo immediately ran to rescue her. With a distressed look, he broke the car window, but luckily, Hee-in wasn't inside. Yoon-woo then saw Hee-in from afar. He finally approached her and hugged her with tears in his eyes. On the other hand, Hee-in couldn't bear seeing Yoon-woo so distressed. She then said she would undergo the treatment. She did it all because she didn't want Yunwo to fall apart if she truly left. Before the operation was carried out, Hee-in gave her personal notebook to Yunwo. Inside, it contained everything about Hee-in's life and her feelings for Yunwo. The operation then began, and Yunwo waited outside. He was very anxious, afraid something unwanted would happen. Suddenly, a group of police arrived. They arrested Yunwo on charges of murder. It turned out that this was all Eun-sung's doing. A few moments later, Hee-in had finished her operation. When she regained consciousness, the first person she saw was Eun-sung. It turned out that this was Eun-sung's true intention. He introduced himself as Hee-in's boyfriend. Meanwhile, Hee-in, who had lost her memory, had no choice but to trust him. However, she felt sadness in her heart. Eun-sung then took Hee-in back to Korea. There, Hee-in was greeted by her family, but she seemed indifferent. It turned out that this was the result of the brainwashing Eun-sung had done, making him the only person Hee-in trusted. Hee-in finally went back to her home, and despite losing her memory, her habit of listening to music remained the same. She saw her locket, and her heart told her to go find Yunwo. At that time, Yunwo had been detained in prison. Hee-in saw that Yunwo was different from what Eun-sung had said about him. But before Hee-in could feel anything, a guard immediately took Yunwo back to his cell. A few days later, a trial was held to determine whether Yunwo was guilty or not. Yunwo was assisted by his friend, who worked as a lawyer. By presenting evidence to the judge, Yunwo was finally released. Secretly, Hee-in had been following the trial. For some reason, she felt embarrassed in front of Yunwo, so she hid. After being declared free, Yunwo returned to work as usual. Whether they liked it or not, he and Hee-in would continue to cross paths. Hee-in felt strange when she saw Yunwo and tried to avoid him. But she thought to herself, "This is strange. Why do I have to avoid this man? I should be indifferent and cold." Eventually, Hee-in acted like she didn't care. But then she was very surprised when Yunwo suddenly appeared in front of her. They chatted for a bit, and Hee-in said, "I'm not comfortable working with you." Hearing that made Yunwo sad, and he repeated something Hee-in had once said to him. Yunwo said, "Aren't I the perfect man in your eyes?" This was misunderstood by Hee-in, and she thought Yunwo was being overly confident and shameless. Hee-in immediately walked away, but since she felt Yunwo was holding her back, she said, "Let go of me. Don't stop me." On the other hand, Yunwo was also confused. When he turned around, Hee-in saw that it wasn't Yunwo stopping her, but her bag strap had gotten caught. She was very embarrassed and quickly left. The next day, Hee-in received an email from herself. She was directed to go to a certain place, and to her surprise, Yunwo was there too. Hee-in then became angry because Yunwo always appeared in her life. However, Yunwo said he also received an email from Hee-in. It turned out that the place had been rented by Hee-in beforehand. The staff there also confirmed this. Soon, a video of Hee-in and Yunwo's wedding was played. Confused, In left the place after seeing all the facts that contradicted what Eun-sung had said. Hee-in's attitude started to change. A package arrived at Hee-in's house, and it turned out to be her personal notebook. As she read the notebook, tears began to fall down her face. Her memory suddenly returned. She finally realized who Yunwo truly was and went to find him. Unfortunately, a tragic fate struck Yunwo. He was hit by a driver who turned out to be Eun-sung. Yunwo was taken to the hospital, but when he regained consciousness, he immediately left, worried something bad might happen to Hee-in. He asked his friend for help. Indeed, at that moment, Hee-in was being held back by Eun-sung to prevent her from going to find Yunwo. While Eun-sung was distracted, Yunwo came to rescue Hee-in and took her away. In a fit of rage, Eun-sung grabbed a weapon and chased after them. He shot at Hee-in, but Yunwo sacrificed himself. Meanwhile, the police, who were always late, finally arrived and arrested Eun-sung. Yunwo was rushed to the hospital. Hee-in's emotions were a mess, and tears kept streaming down her face. Faithfully, she stayed by Yunwo's side, speaking to him even though he wasn't awake. Eventually, Yunwo opened his eyes, and Hee-in was so touched she began crying again. She was extremely grateful to see Yunwo had made it through the critical phase. However, she didn't want to cry for too long out of embarrassment, so she immediately changed her attitude. Once Hee-in and Yunwo's relationship was restored, the only issue left was the company. Hee-in took over her family's company from Eun-sung's mother. She presented evidence in court that the company should rightfully go back to her family. The court ruled in favor of the evidence and found Eun-sung's mother guilty, requiring her to take responsibility for her actions. After the company was reclaimed, Hee-in's family continued to live simply, just as they did when they were struggling. The postponed love story between Hee-in and Yunwo finally began again. Every tear turned into laughter. They were blessed with a very cute daughter. And so, Hee-in, Yunwo, and their child lived a happy life. A new chapter had begun, and with that, the drama came to an end.